Hey subscribers! Welcome to prime time, bitches! Ha!
Yes, in case you haven't guessed, we're talking about Friday the 13th today. No, we're talking about A Nightmare on Elm Street today. Now, about 4 months ago, I uploaded a video where the title of the video was Let's Talk Elm Street. And I basically talked about my favorite Elm Street, which was the very first one, which is the very first one, A Nightmare on Elm Street from 1984. But I also touched on my second favorite Elm Street, which, funny enough, is A Nightmare on Elm Street 2, Freddy's Revenge. Now, I know that traditionally that is one of the least liked in the franchise, you know, basically right up there with Freddy's Dead. And I know there are issues with Elm Street 2. I do know that. But the reason why I like it so much is because Freddy Krueger is fucking scary in that movie. Robert Englund's portrayal of Freddy is fucking scary in that movie. He's menacing, he's creepy, he's eerie, right? Like that pool party scene at the end. I know there's some issues with it in terms of continuity with Freddy and all that kind of shit. But Freddy's fucking scary at that pool party. You know that face when he's like this, you know, and the flames are, you know, in the foreground. He's walking like this. He's fucking scary, man. He's scary. So, but I also briefly touched on what I wanted to see in a remake of A Nightmare on Elm Street and what I think they should do. But I feel that it's so important that I wanted to dedicate an entire video to it, which is what I'm doing here. So, yeah, I was going to do the whole video with the glove on, but not only that would probably be a distraction, these are very sharp, by the way, and I could probably poke my eye out with it. So, let's not do that, shall we? Okay, so where I want to begin with this is let's talk about Robert Englund, okay? Now, I know there are many of you out there who believe that no one else could ever don the glove. No one else could ever don the fedora. No one else could ever don the red and green sweater like Robert Englund could and can. And I understand that. You're emotionally attached to Robert Englund as this character. You grew up with him as this character. But this is nothing new, folks. This has been going on since, you know, whenever there is the potentiality of somebody else donning you know, the role of an iconic character, whether it's in horror, whether it's in sci-fi, whether it's in action or adventure, whatever the case is, there is always sort of an uproar over whether or not the actor in question can do justice to the character. And, you know, the sort of cliche example is Sean Connery with James Bond, right? There are people out there, maybe some of you watching right now, who your Sean Connery will, your James Bond will always be Sean Connery because you grew up with him, or maybe if you didn't, maybe they were the first films you saw, you know, the first James Bond films you saw. And there are some people out there whose James Bond will always be Roger Moore. And that, yes, there are some people out there whose James Bond will always be Pierce Brosnan, right? But folks, to simply say that only one actor who is identified with a particular character can only play that character is simply not true. Now, I understand that when you take somebody like Robert Englund, whose big success in the industry has come, you know, with Freddy Krueger. That's really the only huge success he's had. He's had some minor success in other roles, but he is most identified as Freddy Krueger. And you could say the same thing about Mark Hamill. Now, of course, he has some, you know, has had some success elsewhere as well, but he is most identified as Luke Skywalker. And we become emotionally attached to these characters because they're so identified. There's nostalgia there, there's an emotional attachment there, and we cannot possibly see anybody else playing them. I remember when Heath Ledger was cast as the Joker in 2007. Now, the movie came out in 2008, but they were shooting in 2007, and everybody was like, Heath Ledger? The guy from Brokeback Mountain? You know, the guy from those rom-coms? Are you kidding me? And then, of course, look what happened with that. But that's because Heath Ledger wasn't trying to be Jack Nicholson. He was bringing the spirit of the Joker, the vibe of the Joker, and making it his own in accordance to what Nolan and his brother, you know, had written and what they're bringing to the table in terms of a more grounded reality of the Batman franchise. And grounded reality is something I'm going to talk about in a few moments as well. And people said the same thing about, you know, Ben Affleck when he was cast as Batman. No, Ben Affleck? Ben Affleck as Batman? Are you kidding me? Right? And then, of course, look what happened with that. You know, a lot of fans today think that Ben Affleck is the best Batman that they've ever had. He brought the vibe of Batman, the spirit of what Batman is, to the table and made it his own. And that's what anybody coming forward to play Freddy Krueger will have to do. They don't come to the table to try and mimic Robert Englund and be Robert Englund through his voice or through his, mannerisms or anything like that. They take the spirit, the foundation of what Robert Englund set for Freddy Krueger in that original A Nightmare on Elm Street I'm talking about now, not the later sequels, and they bring their own interpretation to it as long as the spirit of the character is there. You know, we know as a movie-going audience, we're not going to see Harrison Ford as Han Solo, for example, right? But the guy who's going to be playing the young Han Solo, any good director, any good writer, any good actor before him would, if there's any advice, it would be, make it your own. Bring the spirit of the character there. Harrison Ford brought the sarcasm, which was also brought in the writing as well. But Harrison Ford brought the sarcasm, the charisma, the wit, and that's what you need to bring to the character. But don't go into it trying to mimic and sound like Harrison Ford being Han Solo, because then you're just setting yourself up for failure. It's the same thing with Indiana Jones. I always thought that a great Indiana Jones, it might be a bit late right now because he's getting a bit older, but a great Indiana Jones would have been Hugh Jackman. Now, you may or may not agree with me, but I believe that Hugh Jackman could have brought the wit, the charm, the action, the charisma, the hot with the ladies kind of thing to the Indiana Jones character. If they had 10 or 15 years ago said that Hugh Jackman is your next Indiana Jones, I would have thought, oh yeah, okay, totally. He's not going to go into it trying to mimic Harrison Ford, but you could totally see him bringing the same characteristics, the same sort of vibe to the Indiana Jones character. Harrison Ford set what the character was, so everybody who plays that character afterwards has to bring that sort of vibe to the character, but they have to make it their own. Hugh Jackman's not going to walk around going, well, I think that maybe, trying to be Harrison Ford, right? He's going to be Hugh Jackman, but bringing those characteristics to Indiana Jones. I always thought he would have made a great Indiana Jones, and still could. But of course, I think they're going to go with someone younger eventually, which is unfortunate, because I think he would have been amazing. But anyway, back to my overall point. So for those of you who think that Robert Englund can only be Freddy Krueger, I don't believe this is true at all. And I'm not inciting Jackie Earle Haley's portrayal of Freddy as the prime example, okay? But I do believe what Jackie Earle Haley did was good. He made it his own. He brought these, it was a scarier version of Freddy, okay, which is what I like, and that's what I think they need to do. For me, now you may or may not agree with me, but for me, what I think they need to do is they need to go back to the roots and make A Nightmare on Elm Street fucking scary, okay? Live up to the word nightmare in your title. Okay? Because in the original series, by A Nightmare on Elm Street 3, and especially 4 is known as the MTV version, okay? It's like all bets are off, right? Like anything can happen, okay? Because Freddy is funny and he's being sensational and the dreams are sensational. As I mentioned in that other video that I uploaded, it's like, one sensational dream sequence after another, where it's not really about Freddy anymore. It's more about, what sort of crazy, sensational dream sequence and set pieces can we conjure up? And it's like, I don't want to see that. I want this to be about Freddy and how fucking scary he is and how he haunts your dreams. Okay, now that doesn't mean that dreams are not sensational. I'm not saying you can't have crazy dreams. Dreams can be like that. But the series in and of itself became more about that than about what Wes Craven set in the very first Elm Street. So I think you need to go back to the roots of that very first Elm Street. Make it grounded, okay? Look, when you think of the very first Elm Street, is there really anything sensational about it? I mean, really sensational when you compare it to the rest of the series, especially anything after 3. Not really. I mean, the most sensational thing is probably Tina, being dragged up the side of the wall and onto the ceiling, but that was done, it was so grounded in the way it was shot and the way that it was executed and the way that it was presented that it didn't feel sensational. It was just like, whoa, fuck. Like, holy shit, right? Because it was happening in the confines of her bedroom. And there was nothing in the bedroom that was sensational. Everything else looked legit. Like, it wasn't like in this weird sort of surreal world where that was happening. It was happening in her bedroom. And that's what I mean by grounded. Even when Freddy with the long arms, right, was coming after Tina in the alleyway, the setting was grounded. The setting was real. It wasn't in this sensational, weird, crazy world or set where that was happening. It was happening in the fucking alleyway out the back of your house. It's like, whoa, that's fucking scary, right? When the glove comes up in the bathtub in between Nancy's legs, that's fucking scary, but it's coming up in a grounded environment. And for me, that's fucking scary, okay? It's not happening in some sort of surreal kind of Salvador Dali kind of dreamlike world. All that shit's great and all that shit has its place, but I believe the later sequels focus too much on that. I want to get back to the real sort of authentic, grounded kind of where, you know, fucked up shit happens, but in a real sort of relatable environment for our viewers. That's what made the Elm Street, the very first one, so scary, is because it was happening in a real grounded environment. It was like, oh, even you too can have, you know, this can, I have no doubt that women all over the world after that film who saw that movie, just like, you know, the shower scene in Psycho, were probably like thinking twice about taking a bath, right? Because it's relatable. They can identify with it, right? You can't identify necessarily with some sort of sensational, surreal, you know, out of this world set pieces. It just becomes kind of fun and cool, but there's nothing relatable to it. Make the dream sequences feel grounded in our world, okay? We're not going to Freddy's world. He is coming to our world and attacking us. That's what it's about. We're not going to his world. He's coming to our world. He's invading our privacy. That's why it was so fucking off the chain. He's invading our privacy. Okay, and that's why it was so uncomfortable, and that's why the first Elm Street felt like, oh fuck, it was an invasion of our personal space, whereas the other films were like going to his world, and that's not what I want them to focus on. I want them to focus on a grounded, realistic, really genuine sort of take that he's coming to our world, because then you start to get along the lines of like this psychological horror thriller, and you know, if you understand what truly scares us in here from a psychological perspective, you will begin to understand, you know, what is the best way you should go about a film like A Nightmare on Elm Street. You have to get in here. That's where you've got to go. That's number two. The first is you hire an actor that can bring spirit to Freddy Krueger, that understands what made Freddy Krueger scary, understands what Robert Englund did, okay, to make him scary in the first film, and then work with the director and the writer to bring that vibe, to bring that essence and that presence back to Freddy Krueger, where we're like, fuck, man, this guy is fucking scary. Number two is, within the writing, go back to the relatable dream sequences. That doesn't mean you can't have a little bit of fun, right? Even the first Elm Street did, with, you know, coming through the wall over Nancy and, you know, Johnny Depp's character being, you know, pulled through the bed and the blood. But look at where it's happening. It's happening in a bedroom, and there's nothing else in the bedroom that's sensational or weird. And that's what made it scary, is that it felt like, oh shit, this is really happening. Like, this is fucking crazy, right? That's what I think they need to go back to. Not necessarily retread those steps in terms of having, you know, the bath sequence and the through the bed sequence. I'm not saying that. But be creative in the genuine, relatable environments where we can be like, fuck, that was scary. Holy fucking shit. That's number two. Number three is your cast of characters. I don't want to see anybody well-known being cast in these roles. I want relatively unknowns, okay? Whenever you are trying to bring some authenticity to a film, especially when you're remaking a film, I think it's important that we are not distracted by any sort of real, you know, star power. That doesn't mean you cannot have somebody in the movie who's well known to give it some gravitas and give it some sort of, a bit of, respect to the overall sort of story and the film in and of itself. But I don't want to see an ensemble cast of young people that we already know from other things. I don't want to see that. There are talented actresses and actors out there who are relatively unknown that can do justice to these characters, however you write them. And that's what I want to see, because I don't want to be distracted by this star power on screen. I want to be focused on the narrative and the plot and the mood and the atmosphere, which of course leads into my fourth thing that they need to do. Focus on the mood and the atmosphere. The great thing about the first Elm Street is that even when nothing particularly scary is happening on screen, there is a sort of like this dreamlike hue over the entire film. And for those of you who are big fans of the original, you probably know what I'm talking about. Even when you're watching the movie, it's almost like there's this dreamlike haze over the whole movie. Even when, Nancy's just walking to school, or maybe she's, talking to her friend, or she's talking to her mom, there's kind of like this dreamlike hue over the entire film. And I think you need to get back to that. It's so important through the execution of cinematography and the execution of lighting that, you really convey a sense of that grounded, genuine, sort of authentic reality. And one of the reasons why the original A Nightmare on Elm Street sort of has that, and one of the huge reasons why the original Halloween has that, and the original Friday the 13th has that, is because these were independent productions. These were not major Hollywood blockbusters, even for their time. But both directors, John Carpenter and Wes Craven, knew that because their, resources were limited for the most part, okay, more so on Halloween than on A Nightmare on Elm Street, because Elm Street's budget was larger, but it still didn't, negate the fact that both directors knew that it's what you think you see and what you think you hear that is far more scarier than anything I could ever possibly show you right out in the open. And that's why Michael Myers was always in shadow and in the background. And that's why, for the most part, in the original Elm Street, so was Freddy Krueger. They wanted to play on that. They wanted to get inside your head. So when you look at a horror movie today, take It Follows, for example. When you watch the execution of the cinematography, when you watch that movie, there is a sense of realism. There is a sense of being grounded and being in the real world because of the way it's shot, because of the lighting, because of the mood, because of the atmosphere, because of the lack of there being anything sensational about it, gives this very eerie, creepy sort of vibe to the entire movie, which is what you want for something like A Nightmare on Elm Street. When the movie starts to become too polished, too refined, too smooth, too crisp, you lose that edge, that psychological scary edge that I believe you desperately need in a movie like A Nightmare on Elm Street. And even something like Halloween, but more so A Nightmare on Elm Street because of the subject matter of dreams. So you don't want, ironically enough, you don't want anything too sensational or out of this world, because then it becomes a little hokey and a little, maybe a little more transparent than you would like it to be. I don't want them to focus on any sort of modern pop culture references so blatantly obvious, if you know what I mean. Yes, you can bring cell phones into the mix and, smartphones, I mean, right? Your iPhones and your Androids and sure, okay, fine. But I don't want it to be a plot device. So I don't want it to be something like, I'm watching people murdered over Skype, or I'm watching people get murdered on YouTube, or I don't want to bring, the pop culture references of today as a driving plot device into the narrative. I don't want that. Okay. I don't think that's, it's just too, it's too weak. It's too lame. You know, it's not good writing. It's like, it's a cop-out. Well, if we do this, if we focus on, you know, murders online and YouTube and Skype and Snapchat and all this kind of shit that's relevant today, you know, then we're more likely to get, you know, the young people into this. And I get that purely from a business standpoint. I do understand that. But for me, I don't want to focus on it. I want it to be, if you talk about Snapchat or Skype or YouTube, it's just sort of there in the background to sort of set, you know, the scene of where we are in the world, where we are in our time frame. Okay, it's of today. So maybe, you know, you see a girl watching a video on YouTube or something. Okay, you know, we know YouTube exists. We know that, you know, the iPhone 10 exists. We know that Android exists. We know that Instagram exists. But they're not plot devices, you know, for the film. I don't want to see that, because then it just becomes cheesy and cheap, and, you know, that's not what A Nightmare on Elm Street is about. A Nightmare on Elm Street should be about, you know, having these nightmares where there is this creepy fucking guy. Not funny, not no. He is fucking scary. I don't want to see Freddy Krueger at all. What am I up to now? Like 7 or 8 now points or whatever it is? I've lost track. But I don't want to see Freddy Krueger clear as day. One of the things, the mistakes they made, I believe in A Nightmare on Elm Street 3, was we began to see Freddy more clearly. And especially in A Nightmare on Elm Street 4. And look at Freddy's Dead when he's playing that fucking video game. I mean, he looks atrocious. God, there's nothing scary about him. We see him in broad daylight. I mean, it's just, yeah, that's not how you should portray and execute Freddy Krueger in a remake of A Nightmare on Elm Street. I want to see Freddy Krueger always in darkness, always in shadow. Maybe you see glimpses of his face, right? He's fucking scary. I want him to be a boogeyman, a fucking scary boogeyman. I don't want him to be cracking one-liners. I don't want him to be doing any of that. I don't think it should be a plot for plot, point for a beat for beat remake either. I think you may be able to have a classic scene and bring it into the 21st century. I think that's appropriate. But I think there should be enough freshness in the writing and enough newness in the writing that it can stand on its own as well. And I think they attempted to do that with the remake with Jackie Earle Haley in 2010. But the problem they ran into in that movie is that everybody was already affected by Freddy Krueger from the onset of the film, from the very beginning of the movie. We never were able to see the transition. And I think that's really important in a remake of A Nightmare on Elm Street, is that we should be able to see the transition of these characters. So we should be able to see their story arcs go from happy-go-lucky to fucked up by the end of the movie. And we never got to see that in the remake of A Nightmare on Elm Street from 2010. It's like already they were very emo and being affected, and that's fine, but we didn't get to see their story arcs. We were never put in the same position as the characters. And I think that's really important, especially for a film like this, is that I, as an audience member, want to be put in the same position as the characters on screen. So we're starting from the same place. The characters are happy-go-lucky. Maybe they're having, you know, a dream here and there, but they're not totally affected by this man yet, right? We're in that position. And then as we go throughout the movie, we are on that journey together. So we are experiencing, you know, all the emotions and the downfall of these characters and what they're going through together. And that is something that I think is really important. That's what the very first Elm Street did for the most part for their viewers, but something that the remake didn't do. So I think if you sort of tackle these, what am I up to now? Like 9 or 10 things. I think if they do everything, at least put into motion everything that I've sort of stated here in this, you know, rant, I think that will give them the best probability of success. Now, again, what the story will be, I don't know. Who the characters will be, I don't know. I'm talking about from a development standpoint. I am asked, okay, what do you think we should do? Where do you think we should start with a remake of A Nightmare on Elm Street? Well, this is the things that I think you have to keep in mind. These are the things that I think you should keep in mind when talking about a remake of A Nightmare on Elm Street. And when you have all these things on the table, everything everything that I talked about, then we can start, drawing lines from them and, and going, okay, let's try this. Let's do this. Let's get into the writing room now and figure out a story keeping these things in mind. And I think if you do that, you're going to deliver a film that's mature, that's grounded, that's fucking scary. And people will be able to walk out of the theater going, wow. I mean, maybe you'll always like the first one, right? Because you have an emotional attachment to it. We're not creating a movie to disregard the first one. We're creating a genuine, remake to do justice to it, right? So people can leave the theater going, well, I still like the original, but that was really well done. Good job, guys. Really good. That was fucking scary. And that's what you need to do. And I think if you follow a lot of the criteria that I talked about in this video, I think that gives you the best probability of success for that. Now, what the story will be, I don't know. But that's where you have to start. Anyways, folks, my name's Dave McRae. Comment below and let me know your thoughts. I would love to know what you think and what you think they should do with a remake of A Nightmare on Elm Street. Do you agree with me? Maybe you do, maybe you don't. At the end of the day, I couldn't care less. I hope you always do, but doesn't bother me if you don't. If you want to follow me on Facebook, you can at facebook.com/manythingsdave McRae. McRae is MCRAE. Facebook.com/manythingsdave McRae. That's where I upload, where I sort of tend to post when I'm not uploading videos in the meantime and in between time. So you can follow me there if you want. If you don't want to, that's okay too. Comment below and let me know. I'm really curious on what you guys think. I'll talk to you guys soon.
Yeah. Cheers.